Welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 179 for the podcast, and our first episode for 2026. Today, we're joined by Hakan Goka, Managing Director at M Ventures, the strategic corporate venture capital arm of Merck KGaA. With over 2 decades in biotech investing, Hakan has driven transformative deals in oncology, autoimmune disease and beyond, including standout 2025 investments like Forex Therapeutics and portfolio milestones such as Artios' FDA Fast Track designation. As we kick off 2026 at Beyond Biotech, Hakan shares insights on corporate VC advantages, emerging therapeutic priorities, and the industry's evolving landscape amid rising M&A and AI innovation. Let's dive in. Hakan, welcome to Beyond Biotech.
Dylan, thank you. Happy to be here.
Hakan, just to kick us off, can you walk us through your journey into venture capital? How do you find yourself here at M Ventures?
Well, it's a long journey, at least, kind of midway, maybe, hopefully. So I started in venture at Atlas quite a number of years ago, nearly 20 years ago, 2006, from a pure academic background, a PhD postdoc from the Royal Marsden in the UK. After my studies, joining the fund at the entry level in London, getting to work on a number of very exciting opportunities, early and later stage, and that in therapeutics is preclinical to kind of mid-level clinical opportunities. So a number of years there, then moving on to a Dutch fund in the Netherlands called ASCAP Venture, pretty much doing the same thing, but for European opportunities, continuing to do investments in the early stage therapeutic space. And then 12 years ago, I joined M Ventures, and we have changed names a number of times, from MS Ventures to Merck Ventures to M Ventures, where we're stuck with the name. And here, the fund has also changed from a 30 million strategic fund in the therapeutic space. We have expanded that to what we have today at 600 million euro allocation across 3 different sectors as it kind of lines up into the umbrella organization of Merck Group. Healthcare, which is the life science tools, which is the Sigma Millipore angle of the business, and Merck Electronics. And we try to create optionality for the Merck businesses for the future. And going back to myself in the venture field, so what brings a scientist to the venture side is a good question that one wonders, and sometimes I wonder. And here, what brings you from bench science to kind of closer to the business, right? I mean, venture is not pharma, venture is not biotech, venture is kind of the middleman in a way on enabling technologies and ideas to go towards market and commercial applicability in the simplest term. So that's, I guess, what we enable. And that was indeed the attraction for me of, we're doing all this great science in the lab. And how does this actually get to be a product in the end, a therapeutic, a device, a tool? And how do you do that, let's say, supporting that network of bright minds to really get that towards something that is beneficial on hopefully not a day-to-day in the therapeutic side, but of use to bettering human well-being. That was the attraction.
For people who are a little bit unfamiliar with M Ventures, you say you've been there for 12 years now. You talked a little bit about some of the focus areas that you have. But what's the core mission of M Ventures, and its investments? You've got to, of course, balance the finance side with some wider strategic goals. Tell me a little bit about this business.
So, Dylan, I guess many of the listeners would know about corporate venture, which is a tool that large organizations use to keep closer to innovation, to the external world, to growing their pipelines, growing their own understanding of where the external world may go. And this external versus internal is getting more blurry in the modern times. And essentially, this corporate work is what we do at M-Ventures. We are Merck's corporate venture fund, Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. We act across the three business sectors and a smaller allocation in what we call the white space, frontier tech and sustainability. And we do that through a 600 million euro fund. As I mentioned, this is an allocation, not necessarily a fund structure per se. And what do we do? So in the corporate venture world, there's different colors and tastes to the cake. Some are more strategic, some are more financial, some are in the middle. We're in that kind of in the middle group where we do have this strategic remit, but we are also following a financial return remit. So it's let's call it a dual remit organization. And the strategy side is to allow Merck to have optionality in the future across those three businesses for either collaborations or potential M&A opportunities. And that time frame of future can change from business to business, from technology to technology, to asset. And from the financial angle, how do we look at that? We have to have good returns, hopefully institutional VC standard returns, which we have now validated, and I can talk about that later. And the reason for that is that Merck itself, although it has three businesses, would work in specific areas of interest across its lifetime, and strategies change, and etc. So it's highly unlikely that a corporate would be the potential acquirer for all the investments of the corporate venture arm. So what do you do with the investments that go into it? So we look at that with a pure financial view, that if companies or technologies evolve to fall outside of the future strategy of the mothership, or the mothership has changed its strategy significantly where our investments fall out, then we look at those as pure financial investments to maximize the return, so we can utilize that return cash in the next generation of strategic investments. So all our investments start with a strategic tick in the box, and then they evolve either remaining strategic or moving towards the financial return phenotype. So that's essentially, how we look at it to enable the company to have optionality in the future.
Since M-Ventures got started, there's a big and impressive portfolio of companies, including some spin-offs from Merck itself. How are you sourcing these companies, and how are you structuring the deals that you do with them?
So this is a good question. I guess it changes across each corporate and perhaps the thinking around the assets of that type. So maybe we can talk about a number of spin-outs that we did actually that included the basket where Calypso was in. This was after the time of Merck's acquisition of Serono in Switzerland, when the company also went through a strong strategy consolidation, where the decision was to pause work on certain therapeutic areas and increase work in other therapeutic areas. And with that strategy exercise, we were invited to provide some kind of 1 foot outside point of view, not really external, but semi-external point of view. Which ones of those assets could we actually utilize to maximize value for the mothership without them developing that in-house? So Calypso was one of those. I wouldn't call it an asset. It was a team and their assets with the company. So Calypso's management team were ex-Merck employees that we worked with to set up the company and be the first financier behind the opportunity. And that's, perhaps less seen nowadays, but it has been pretty much of a requirement for a long period of time in in pharma or corporate spinouts to really validate that this is not some skeleton in the cupboard that is being spun out, instead of that external world would actually want to see some validation that the pharma arm or the corporate arm in some format remains attached and dedicated to the program to drive it to success externally versus internally, but nonetheless with the same level of interest. So that is what we have done in quite a lot of our spin-outs. I think we have done overall 7, 8, perhaps 9 of these exercises in different formats. And we have structured them as that we would be the seed investors as a standalone in most cases, develop the company for 1, max 2 years to really validate a couple of the killer experiments, whatever that may be, to ourselves validate that the programs have legs to live on, and show it to the outside that these are actually exciting programs that are now outside of a pharma company that comes with the pedigree of being built in a large company, that we could together finance to whatever the readout will be, phase 1 trials, phase 2 trials, even to market at some stages. So from a structuring perspective, we have looked at it as just any other institutional VC deal in most of our cases.
What about sourcing some of these other companies, the ones who come not from within Merck, but from elsewhere? How do you find them? Where are you going to look for them?
It's probably pretty much the same answer that you would have heard from other VCs. It's a lot that come through personal networks, from syndicate partners, from entrepreneurs that we have worked with, from key opinion leaders that we have built relationships with. And this all needs effort. I think that's probably maybe the more useful point here, that it needs effort, it needs approachability from the venture point of view. It needs that you would actually have systematic meetings, frequent meetings with academic institutions. You would have to have time to give to people for them to share their bright ideas with you. And that is essentially how we have been sourcing our deals. And of course, some of the deals come through our internal organization, with some of our R&D colleagues saying, hey, we have read a couple of papers in this space, or we know this professor at X university that has some ideas that they have been contemplating how to build into a product. So there's also that aspect that is actually the added benefit of being part of a corporate venture fund.
Now, as I understand it, corporate venture funds like M Ventures, they often have this very formal firewall between the venture fund and the corporate owner. That's to maintain that independence, to reduce the conflicts. How does this actually work in practice, knowing that on one side you've got this huge company, and then you've got your team with the strategic remit to go out and find companies that might fit into Merck in the future?
It's actually quite simple when you think about it. Once you have actually gone through the consideration, it's not that different than any other business. I mean, from a conflict perspective, there will be conflicts coming at some stage through the lifetime of a venture fund or a corporate, and this is exactly why you need to have these firewalls in place, approved and rubber stamped by head of legal, whomever the right entity would be, and that's not just to protect the small company, but also the reputation of the big company and the people involved on either side. And that's just the softer aspects, if I may. But there is the harder aspects of the law, where as a corporate person who takes a board seat, your fiduciary duties are towards the small company that you're shareholders in. Firstly, as a board member, to all the shareholders, not just the shareholder that you're representing. And that's the same story also for institutional venture funds that may have investments from XYZ LPs that may be more strategic than financial. So these are kind of the very serious parts of how do you operate in the space, supported by your legal teams and sometimes even with advice from external legal firms.
Tell me, on a day-to-day basis, how is M Ventures collaborating with Merck? Are you participating in their business development teams, with their innovation teams? Tell me a little bit about how you work day to day with the parent company.
Absolutely. So It is a life of its own, corporate venture, and many of us do it differently. How we do it here at M Ventures is that we work quite closely with our R&D groups, head of R&D, external innovation, and other innovation functions in the organization, with the aim that we are essentially having a good look on what is happening in the external ecosystem. So are we invited to every strategy discussion? No. Certain things are obviously need to know basis, and that's how business operates. Do we get frequent updates and interactions with key decision makers in the organization on where the strategy is looking at? What are the therapeutic areas that the company are or will be considering? What are the modalities that we'll be looking at? What devices, what tools are we wanting to have in the future in the pipeline of the mothership? Those are the discussions that we systematically have with the organization. With BD, we of course interact, but nonetheless, we do not sit through their meetings. They do not sit in our meetings, because that's where I think the conflict may become a bit too close to the bone, especially in live interactions where, at least from the BD side, it'll be need to know basis. And from our side, if there is an interest in our portfolio companies, we strongly encourage them to talk directly to the portfolio company rather than us being the middleman there. Because by the time there is interest, they would have known each other, they would have talked to each other, and hopefully we would have ticked that kind of KPI for ourselves that we have initiated and help them develop a softer relationship where it'll be easier for them to talk later on.
Tell me a little bit about what we saw at M Ventures in 2025. You had some great investments, some big investments right through the whole year, in fact. What were the deals that stood out to you?
Well, I would say, of course, all of them. So we're very proud of our portfolio and the management teams that are building those very strong stories. So what have we done in 2025? I think two of our new investments have been NRG Therapeutics and Trimtech in the UK, both happening to be in the neurology space. Trimtech being a highly unique and early platform technology with a degrader approach to specifically to aggregated proteins. As you can imagine, that plays potentially a huge role in neurology, in neurodegenerative diseases. And they also were nicely awarded the Fierce Biotech's Fierce 15 award this year, which we're proud of. And NRG Therapeutics a bit more advanced, entering phase 1 with a 50 million pound Series B, where we participated. And we, of course, had a couple of refinancing, some of them quite large in our portfolio. Actitera, for example, is one that we have built from scratch with Andreas Koutopoulos, who was working with us as an EIR, to bring in a number of very well-known venture capital colleagues into the Series A, $75.5 million in radioligand therapeutics with a very unique approach. Repronova was another one in the women's and men's health space, which is perhaps can be seen as a niche area for many VCs, but something that we have been doing as a repeat space, as Merck remains as the largest fertility company globally. And Artios, one of the companies that we helped build from the early days, starting with SV, through the Series A to where we are today, where we have 2 programs in the clinic, and recently very happy again to hear that they got their fast track designation for their lead program. So those are some of the things that have at least made it to the news flow, and quite a lot of other exciting stuff that hopefully will pop up early next year.
You're someone who's worked in VC outside of top pharma, and now you're working as a corporate VC. How do you compare those two models? Is it very different on the day-to-day level?
the core of it is actually pretty much the same. And if you look at many corporate VCs, quite a lot of us have institutional venture experience within their teams, and decision making, the how you help build your companies are different. So perhaps the one thing to think of is, if you remove the titles of corporate versus institutional, what are the differences? Sometimes the differences are kind of, let's call it the fund life period, that CVCs you could imagine as having longer fund lives instead of the 10-year typical fund limitations that institutional VCs have. From a process perspective, pretty much the same for most of us, institutional versus corporate venture. And maybe one of the beauties of the corporate side is that you have, in most cases, you have a very large organization of research, commercial development, regulatory behind you that you can have pretty fast access to. And that, of course, is two-sided. You've also got to be able to help these colleagues in-house for them to spare their time for you. So that's one of the perhaps key attributes of corporate venture, that you have pretty immediate access to a vast number of very smart people, very experienced people that have done multiple of what you're trying to do many times.
One of the things that I read about you and read that you've said was that working in corporate VC allows you to take some calculated bets on platforms that may not be the core focus of Merck, but are something that could pay off in the end. Is that something you enjoy doing, to look for something that is just a shining light, something you can take a bet on that maybe the people at Merck didn't get on their radar or didn't see coming?
I mean, we have done a number of those. I guess that's also part of the job of the venture group, as the kind of the high risk, high return. Again, kind of drawing a simile to institutional venture funds. I guess alternative investments, which venture falls under in financial nomenclature, is that, and corporates also look at it the same way. So you have external innovation, you have M&A, you have BD, you have venture. So you can kind of put these in a timeline. Or M&A is pretty much immediate. BD may be kind of the next in line, and venture kind of a longer term strategy outlook, and then you have the external innovation part, which may even go into academic collaborations. And what we try and do, and we have done multiple times, is to go into highly novel areas, spaces, selectively, that could potentially bring up be that a blockbuster or a real asset that can change clinical paradigms, where it may not necessarily be built in-house, depending on the size of the corporate and the size of their R&D teams, or attracts the same level of, let's say, early confidence that some companies may or may not have within their in-house team. So the venture groups are kind of remitted with that. Or are there exciting stuff that we can actually see how it works? Would it be productive? Because there's a lot of beautiful, very heavy, very novel science that comes out. Unfortunately, not all of them make it to a product or a platform that repetitively could give you programs. And that's part of what CVCs do, and that's also part of what early stage institutional VCs do, that with a limited amount of cash, which then you would call a seed, maybe a Series A, depending on the location, could you actually get to that validation, whatever your killer experiment will be, to show how broad the application of that technology would look like. It could be small, it could be large, it could be expansive, but at least you would have taken a calculated bet with a limited amount of investment to give the guys the real chance of showing if that technology actually does what it says on the tin, if that makes sense.
If we're looking forward into 2026 now, where are you going to prioritize your investments in the year to come? And I'm talking here in terms of therapeutic areas. Are you sticking with autoimmune oncology? You mentioned as well reproductive health not too long ago. Are these the areas where you're going to keep a focus, or are there new areas that you might look into?
I don't expect that our space, especially from the therapeutic area angle, I don't expect our areas changing dramatically. I mean, the umbrellas that we work under are pretty broad already. Right? We do oncology, we do autoimmune, we do neuro, we do fertility, women's health, male fertility, something that we have started doing, but male, female fertility, you can kind of box them in the same thing, depending on which angle you're looking at, since it's it's a kind of a common struggle for that. What we probably will not be doing will be to do anything in infectious diseases, just simply because Merck Biopharma does not do anything in infectious diseases. So hence it would be out of strategy. We are not active in medical devices, for example. It's just not a kind of business that Merck considers getting in. And we will, however, continue investing in platforms where the exact therapeutic area or what that platform would be useful for is not obvious at the start, which can be the case in many of these. We will continue doing those with an open view of, where will this be most valuable for. And if it happens to be outside of Merck areas, then we will continue them as financial investments. But as you know, many of these platforms churn out a bunch of programs, targets, etc. that would fit one of our strategies moving forward. But we will remain active in that. We will continue investing in fertility and women's health. And we had a remit expansion to also invest in, let's call, early stage clinical companies, which historically where we started from preclinical. With our added remit, we're actually taking that bet of, what would you call it, turning the card on phase 1 or phase 2 trials to really showing the proof of concept in the clinic, which we have previously not done as a first investment in.
What about platforms that are not biotech platforms, but tech bio platforms, AI platforms? Are these things that you'll be interested in investing in as well?
Well, we have actually done that, and we have we have a number of these investments across our healthcare therapeutics investment umbrella and also the life science tools umbrella. So we have invested in companies like Ictos in France, where they're working on AI in drug discovery for small molecules. We have invested in software companies like Future Fertility in Canada, where their algorithms mixed with AI is indicating which eggs, for example, are the most healthy for utilization for egg freezing and in due course IVF. With the second program that we still can't talk about, which is in a similar area, we have invested in spatial biology companies, from both as a benchtop device to all the cartridge work that goes into it, to other companies that do the software for spatial biology. So we have actually done quite a bit in that space.
It's just before JPM now. JPM's next week. When should we be expecting to hear about the first deals of 2026 from M Ventures?
Probably one should never jinx their deal timelines, as things can change. But I would certainly see us putting some PR out on new investments in Q1. JPM is late this year, so we're holding our horses.
Let's look a little bit forward now as we're moving into 2026. How is the industry looking to you? Do you feel like it's healthy and robust, maybe a little under the weather, or it really needs a little bit of medical attention, so to speak?
Little under the weather with some medical attention is probably the good way to put it. I think things haven't been went north so much yet. We are seeing some improvements in the financing environment. There is quite a bit of M&A that is happening that is kind of the precursor to people feeling confident again in deploying cash into early stage companies. The public markets, we'll see how it moves. It looks like things may improve towards the back end of 2026, which also is a path for VCs to monetize their existing investments, which helps them to raise their next funds, etc. So, we are hopeful in what will come through in 2026, but we're not out of the woods yet. Is probably the right terminology to use here. The financing environment still remains pretty tough, especially if companies haven't really gotten to show significant deliverables within their current funding rounds. That the next rounds are possible, but they're tough and takes longer to put together than historically they have been.
You mentioned the M&A picking up, and it has picked up a little bit compared to 2024. It picked up in 2025. We've got the impact of AI. We've got metabolic health, which continues to explode. I mean, are there trends that you're a little bit more optimistic about, even if the industry as a whole is still digging its way out of a hole?
I think we will probably see quite some movement towards, again, kind of more genetically defined diseases across different therapeutic areas, simply because the late stage trials are more handleable with limited amounts of cash, where you can hopefully increase the percent of patient benefit in those groups. We think there will be, we're already seeing some more shift towards immunology from oncology in the second half of 2025. So we expect that will continue. And even on the fertility side, which has been a space that has been ignored, we're seeing further activity of new research becoming actual biotech companies out of academia into the corporate, into a commercial setting. So we'll see probably some more of that moving forward. And neuro continues growing significantly.
One thing that just must be great when you're working in venture capital is you get to see things really early stage, sometimes before they've even found exactly where they're going to focus. Is there something that you're seeing really early on that has you and the team just buzzing that this could be something in a couple of years?
Well, we have a couple of early stage technologies, thinking, ideation that we're following. I think it's probably too early to put it in words here. But what I can say is that there has been no hindrance on exciting, super smart science coming out of universities, which is very positive for patients, firstly, and the industry overall.
And Hakan, if I can just give you just one final question, if you had to give some advice to these biotechs who are coming to pitch to you, coming to talk to corporate VC, if they're coming to M Ventures this year, how are they going to stand out? What are they going to do that makes them a little bit different to everybody else who comes knocking on your door?
I don't think the approach is any different from approaching any type of VC, corporate or not, actually. I think the important thing is that we all are aware that the whole, I guess the whole world is inundated with news and pieces of information which has become even more freely available. Hence, what I would advise the entrepreneurs is to really go through their messaging in a very succinct way. Right? What is it that the person opposite would want to hear, and get to that point pretty fast. I think many of the messages are lost in the current world of multiple, communication platforms. In-person interactions still matter. Going back to our base of humanity, I guess, and having a very clear explanation of your technology, where it could take you. How have you thought about getting that to a product setting, and kind of look backwards from that. So this would be my potential You can even call it the target product profile. And this is how I'm looking back at it, where it is today. This is the amount of cash I will need. This is probably the timeline that it'll take. And these are the hurdles and the opportunities that I see. So I think being very realistic with approaching venture colleagues is going to help them quite a bit.
Hakan, thanks for joining us today on Beyond Biotech.
Dylan, thank you for the opportunity.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.